Now, the World Bank recently expressed concern over the debt payment to revenue ratio, saying that reduced revenue earnings might render the country's debt unsustainable.
Yes, indeed. Now, before we get into our discussion, let's take a quick break and come back. All right, we'll put that break on hold. Okay, we're joined now by a financial analyst, Emeka Obiareri. Good morning and thanks for joining us via Skype this morning.
Good morning, Ngozi. Good morning, Mike.
Yes,
morning.
indeed. Now, IMF says that Nigeria's debt stock is not good. I mean, the macroeconomic instability is not good, and it's not good for the Africa region. And it could be worse than the present recession in their thinking. What do you make of this?
I totally agree with their position. And you recall that the last time I was in your studio, we discussed it extensively. 17.36 trillion naira debt profile. This year alone, we are earmarked to borrow about 2.36 trillion, mostly to fund recurrent expenditures, not even capital projects. You know, one of the things that worry me about the Nigerian debt profile is that we are not borrowing to build. We are not borrowing to capital. We are not borrowing to develop those key critical infrastructures that are self-liquidating and be able to service the loan. Basically, we've borrowed all through this way or through these periods for consumption. And interestingly, if you ask the average person in the economic management team of the federal government of Nigeria, they will tell you that we are not troubled because debt to GDP is less than 20%. They will refer you to the debt to GDP of the US. They will refer you to debt to the GDP of other countries that are on the high side. But these people forget to understand that these other clients borrow to develop capital. They borrow to develop infrastructure. And if you look at the ratio of debt in those environments, their capital market is so deep. Take, for instance, South Africa. The GDP of South Africa is about $300 billion. But the debt of the South African capital market, the stock exchange, is almost about $1 trillion. Compared to Nigeria, GDP of about $490 billion. But our debt capital market, our stock exchange, it has a capitalization of about just $170 billion. You know, it's very, very worrisome. And if, again, you look at debt to revenue profile of this country, you will discover that the two certain revenue profile that we have in Nigeria today, the crude oil earning, customer excise department duties, and the tax receivables from federal inland revenue services, you will discover that the certain revenues that we expect to get into our economy is about 3.2 trillion. Yet, and again, remember that just yesterday, the Nigerian Labour Union has entered into a discussion with the Ministry of Labour to request for increase in minimum wage. Currently, the wage bill of the public service is about 1.8 trillion. For example, assuming they reach a compromise and they go to the mid-tier level, maybe 40 or 50,000 naira per as minimum wage, you will discover that in the next couple of months, in the next couple of years, we will have a minimum wage bill that may overfloat our public wage bill.
Now, economists will say there's nothing wrong with borrowing as far as economic terms are concerned. But in the case of Nigeria, what is really wrong with the way we borrow and the way such kind of funds are used?
Mike, the major problem we have in Nigeria is that we borrow to consume. We don't borrow to build capital. And even the little we borrow to do capital, over 40% of what we borrowed do not even reach the intended purposes. Some of them are filtered away through over-invoicing and through one form of corruption or the other along the whole value chain in the public sector. Now, the most worrisome thing again about our public borrowing is that the fiscal side and the monetary side together have devised very creative ways of stifling the private sector, you know, access to capital. I will give you an example. You know, in the last 3 months, thereabout, the foreign exchange market has been a bit stable. The naira to the dollar has hovered between 380 to 400, at least a bit stable. It has not been that volatile like we had it in 2016. Many have clapped, but we've not bothered to ask ourselves this question. what is actually happening in the system? Banks are compulsorily debited and their money is taken to fund borrowing by the CBN by way of T-bills. We have devised creative ways in the Central Bank of Nigeria to ensure that the foreign exchange market remains stable. But at the other run, we are suffocating borrowing for the private sector. When the federal government of Nigeria go to the capital market to borrow, money is fungible, capital is scarce. What they are simply doing is to reduce the volume of capital available for the private sector to borrow. If you go to the money market today, for 90-day borrowing, banks are lending at 27%, 30%. And this is because the liquidity in the system is very, very low. The CBN just finished their MPC meeting, and the whole asymmetric, the whole indices were retained at the same level, liquidity at 30%. And what they are simply doing, for example, now, their own unique way of forward, where they ask investors that want to source for foreign exchange, 2 months forward, 3 months forward. Under the normal forward setting, agreements are reached, concessions are paid. Now, at the end of the period, values are exchanged, naira is moved and dollar received. But in the CBN creative ways of managing liquidity in the system, once the forward is agreed, they will freeze the depositor's money and take the money in advance. That simply means that for the 2 months, the customer is lending CBN money at 0 interest rate. So some of these creative ways, everybody has been clapping. Yes, there has been relative stability in that market, but it's a creative way, not a real ingenious way, that has actually stifled that market. As I'm talking to you today, if we talk about diversifying the economy, if we talk about boosting the manufacturing sector, it is for us to diversify, but you cannot diversify in an atmosphere where cost of fund is atrocious. At 30% 90-day money, how would the manufacturer make returns? It's not, we're even talking about infrastructure deficit that is crippling this economy. If we want to borrow, we must borrow creatively. This public sector is stifling the private sector capital. That is the problem we are having.
Okay, so let me jump in here. What would be that creative borrowing then? I've heard experts like yourself say, look, it's important for the private sector to actually drive the borrowing and not the government.
Exactly. That is why, I gave you instances. Just like this week, the federal government did they took a right step. They announced to us that they've concessioned the narrow railway gauge lines from Lagos to Kano and from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri to GE. And GE will be investing about $2 billion in that sector by way of bringing in 20 coaches and all those stuff and repairing the rail lines, which is very, very good. Now, very good step. The same federal government have taken this right step to concession the narrow lines, are going out of their way to borrow $11.7 billion directly to do the standard gauge line. Does that look right at all? Why not in the same way that they've concessioned the narrow gauge line, for them to also set up a special purpose vehicle, bring in bidders, every party stakeholders to also bid to construct and manage this standard gauge line in a way that we do not put unnecessary debt burden on the public sector. And I will tell you this, it will be more efficient, it will be more transparent, it will add more value to us. But the situation where the public sector is allowed to borrow directly, I will tell you 40% of that money will not get to the purpose for which it's being borrowed. They will divert it, they will squander it, they will loot it. Federal government of Nigeria must diverse creative PPP purposes to ensure that we do this in a way that is very, very right, in a way that we do not mortgage the future of an unborn generation that will come up. Now, in 2015, debt to GDP was about 12.4%. Now it's 18.6. 2016 is 18.2%, 6%. Before we know it, it will get to about 30% mark. What did we do with this money that we are borrowing? That's the question we should ask ourselves.
That's a very good question.
Must devise robust, creative, public-private partnership initiatives in all the critical sectors of the economy. From the transmission power lines, they've divested from the discos, from the GENCOs. They should devise other ways to develop the other key critical infrastructure.
Emeka, I wonder what your views are when government says it's going to concentrate more on foreign loans to reduce the exposure of the FG to domestic debt market, which is really where the bulk of this debt is?
Because that one is even more dangerous. It's even more dangerous because the only source of foreign exchange earning that we have that is so certain now is the crude oil earning. And the price of crude oil over the last 1 year has tanked down to between $50 to $55 per barrel. And interestingly, when we talk about this borrowing dollar to do what? Is it not the same thing we're complaining here? They want to borrow $11.7 billion to fund railway line when they've not even amended the Moribond Railway Act of 1955. Come on. See, it's not just a matter of borrowing. Borrowing to do what? I have said this thing. If you look at public sector corporations that are working, it is the public sector corporation that we are funded through a partnership between the private and public sector. The liquefied natural gas of Nigeria is doing so well. They borrowed dollar to fund that project. That project has been able to liquidate itself and earning us good dividend. So the federal government of Nigeria, if they are very honest, if they are very sincere, if they are altruistic, if their interest is the interest of the minds of this country, must devise robust private-public partnership arrangement that does not put the debt burden on Nigeria, but put the debt burden on the balance sheet of the incorporated SPV that they will go into in partnership with the private sector. Take, for example, the Second Niger Bridge. The federal government of Nigeria is doing that Second Niger Bridge on the same platform. They are investing 30%. The private sector, led by the Sovereign Wealth Fund, is investing 70%. Why must they not divide the same way? Why would they do one project with good scheme? Lagos State government has perfected this art. Cross River State government, they are doing the same thing. What is wrong with us in Abuja? That is a question we should ask ourselves.
All right, Nnameka, from OPEC meeting yesterday, they have extended Nigeria's oil output cut by 9 months.
9 months.
I wonder how this is going to help Nigeria in any way, learning from the past and projecting forward.
Mike is very, very good. Remember that the whole essence of this cut in the global supply is to enable the oil producing nations to exhaust the stock overhang that have been there over the last 1 year. Also recall that the global oil output per day is about 93 million barrels. 1.8 million barrels cut is okay, but it will not push the prices of the crude oil in the market to a high level. At least it will stay within that $50–$55 mark. It may inch up to $60 per barrel towards December, and that is it. It is good for us. We must also be able to manage our output and critically sustain the robust engagement we are having with 9 militants to ensure that there is no disruption in our output. And thankfully, the National Assembly, the Senate, has passed the Petroleum Industry Bill, the Governance Bill, which is good for the government. At least it will bring about transparency. But there's an aspect of that bill that they've not yet touched, and which is the most critical, and which will ensure that we have stability in Niger Delta region. The one that has to do with community participation, 10% of the host community. That one must be passed. That one is more important than the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill. And the 3, we must not continue to run away with the issue of resource control. The federal government of Nigeria, all the stakeholders must go back to resource control. The major problem we have, and that is one of the greatest bane to our quest for diversification, is this issue of lack of resource control. In 1960 to 1966, we had resource control. Each and every constituent unit in the country then went creatively to develop the mineral sectors, to develop the agri sectors, to bring it something to the table. As long as we have refused to implement resource control, to bring back resource control, I will tell you, we'll be wasting our times in terms of diversification. Resource control is very, very key.
Yeah, Nnameka, thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's the much time can permit us right now, but we thank you, Nnameka Biariri, financial analyst, for lending your voice on this program this morning. Thank you.